In this video, we're going to talk about calculate minimum cutter extension. You can find this by going to the project tree, clicking on the tooling branch, and then down at the bottom in the configured tooling section, you'll find it. First, let's take a look at the tool manager file. In this project, we have a holder, an extension that has a shank and a shoulder on it, and a cutter with a flute length standard end mill. So let's go ahead and run this simulation. And we're going to see that the extension hits the stock. So we could go through and measure and figure out what the appropriate stick out is and go back to the tool manager. Or we could just tell Vericut right from the beginning what it should be. So we'll turn on calculate minimum cutter extension, and we'll give it a holder clearance of 2 millimeters so that there's an extra 2 millimeters between any holder and stock, and then we'll run it again. And this time when we get to the end, we're going to get notified that there's been changes made to the tools and we'd like to save them. So let's go ahead and save them. We'll save it with a new name. And then we'll want to add that tool manager file to the project. So we'll pick the new one. And we're going to go ahead and play it again. This time we see that our tool doesn't require the extension and it has more stick out of the cutter. So let's take a look at the tool manager file. What did it change? So we've got our holder and we've got our cutter, and we still have our extension, except the extension got pushed all the way up into the holder because it wasn't really necessary. All right, so what if we want to maintain that extension's position? So in this simulation, we're going to see that we get a similar collision, but this time, after I reset, we're going to turn on calculate minimum cutter extension, but I'm also going to turn on keep holder stack because I want to keep that relationship between the extension and the holder. Run through the sim. We're going to get our notice again that things have changed. I'm going to say yes. And save it with a new name again. And activate that new tool manager file. And this time when we play, we see we've maintained that we have the same holder stack up between the extension and the holder, but the cutter's sticking out more, and no collision. Perfect. We'll take a look at the tool manager file, and we see we've got our holder and our extension, and they're set up just like they were, and now we've got our cutter sticking out further. Perfect. So how about wanting to shorten the cutter? Can Vericut shorten the cutter for you? So let's say we've got a tool path that's cuts really shallow, and so we've got excess stick out. We want to stiffen up and make that more of a rigid setup. So we've got a nice clean run, shallow depth of cut. Let's go take a look at the tool. We look at the cutter, we see that it has 5 millimeters of flute and 7 millimeters of stick out. So it's got an extra 2 millimeters sitting there. All right, so let's hit reset. Let's go back over to the tooling tab, turn on calculate minimum cutter extension, and this time we'll let it run and we'll see what happens. All right, so we get the same notice. Let's make ourselves another version. Call it 3. activate that guy. The project. Reset. And play. And already we can tell that there's less cutter sticking out. And we've got a more rigid tool setup. Let's take a look at it. Here we can see that it's definitely not sticking out as much. It's only sticking out a little over 3 millimeters now instead of 7. But we also notice that the flute length is tucked up inside of that extension. So we don't want to be holding onto the tool like that. So we can also tell Vericut when it's not okay to shorten the cutter length. So I'm going to go back. I'm going to go back to my original tool manager file. And I'm going to turn on calculate minimum cutter extension. And this time I'm going to say do not shorten the cutter. This is as short as I want this cutter to be. And so now Vericut knows I'm only going to make tools longer. So if I build all of my tools in Vericut in the tool manager to begin with, as short as I'd ever want them to be in the holder, when I turn on calculate minimum cutter extension, Vericut will know never make it shorter, but if it needs to, make it longer when appropriate. And we get to the end of this guy and we don't get the notice because we told it it shouldn't be any shorter than that, so it didn't modify it. And those are the steps of calculate minimum cutter extension.